What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. Today's video, we're going to continue to look at the divisions in preparation for the 2024 fantasy football season. Today, we are doing the AFC South. I did the AFC North and East over the past 2 weeks. We're going to pick up the pace a little bit as we're starting to get into August here in the draft season. We're going to look at all the divisions, and we're going to do some other content as well to prep for the fantasy football season. If you're interested, please like and subscribe to my channel. I make other content too. You can check that out in the description below and check out my page. You can see a wide variety of content. So we're going to get started. Going to pick up the pace a little bit from what we did in this last video. We're going to go through these teams alphabetically and by position: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and touch on defense and kicker as well. I'm going to start with the Houston Texans. The Houston Texans are everybody's sleeper pick for this year. Really exceeded expectations last season and managed to win the division. It was quite incredible what they were able to do. And now with the addition of Stephon Diggs, Joe Mixon, they're starting to all of a sudden become a fantasy player, which has not been the case with this team since the Deshaun Watson-Hopkins days. And now this team is arguably even better than that. So a lot of changes. CJ Stroud is the guy that's getting a lot of the hype. Did very well last season. If you picked him up on waivers when he was available, he was a league winner. Now he is going way too high, in my opinion. He's going generally in the third round. And I know that CJ Stroud has had some amazing games, and he has a lot of potential coming into this league and seemingly figuring it out right away. There's a lot of question marks that I have with taking him in the third round. I would be comfortable taking somebody like him later in fantasy football, like maybe in the 5th and 6th round, but he doesn't really give you the elite rushing value that you would be looking for in quarterbacks, that are taken that high. So, in my opinion, taking CJ Stroud over somebody like Lamar Jackson or even Jalen Hurts would be a mistake. And this isn't to discredit him as a quarterback. I think he's a good quarterback, and I think he has a bright future ahead of him. But I think overall, the amount of value that you're giving up in the first 4 rounds by taking CJ Stroud that early is going to be problematic. Obviously, that's a different story if you're in 2 QB leagues, but I'm talking specifically for 1 QB leagues. It's standard format that you find on like ESPN, Sleeper, Yahoo, things like that. It's just not worth it to me to take him that high. I only take quarterbacks that high if they do give that rushing value, like I said. So there's other values that you could find that are more of like a great value version of CJ Stroud, for lack of better words. You could find other guys that I think could replicate similar stats and still be very productive for you. In terms of the running back position, the running back, they brought in Joe Mixon from Cincinnati. Joe Mixon has had up and down performances throughout his career. He fills a very needed void because Dameon Pierce was just not cutting it for them. He's still on the team, but I don't really see a role for Dameon Pierce to become fantasy relevant again. But I do like Joe Mixon. He was very effective as a goal line back for the Cincinnati Bengals throughout his career. And he comes here to Houston, going at a pretty solid ADP around the 4th round. I would be comfortable taking Joe Mixon there. He's not one of the guys that I'm targeting necessarily, but if I'm in need of a running back, I don't think that's a bad place to start. If you go wide receiver in the first 3 rounds and then you take Joe Mixon in the 4th, I wouldn't have any issue with that necessarily. But he's not somebody that I'm targeting specifically because generally these running backs that change teams like this when they're kind of in the later half of their prime, it doesn't necessarily go well. But he is the best option for them. Dameon Pierce is still there. Don't think that he's going to have much opportunity, though. They actually just signed Cam Akers. It'd be interesting to see if he makes the team. And Dare Ngubawale, who's not a fantasy relevant player either. Wide receiver, there's a lot of question marks on what this will look like. They now have 3 excellent wide receivers that are all going pretty high in drafts, generally all above the 5th round. Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, and Tank Dell. Stephon Diggs has always, throughout his career, been very fantasy relevant. And in his time in Buffalo, he was a first-round pick. But he really teetered off last year when they changed offensive coordinators. So now what is that going to look like when he comes to Buffalo? I have a lot of question marks about Stephon Diggs. he is getting up there in age, and he is a very good NFL player. So I think that he could still be a very relevant fantasy football wide receiver, but I just don't think that he has the upside given Collins, Tank Dell, he's not the only one in the spotlight now, like kind of like he was in Buffalo. And I think that what we saw at the end of last season is concerning to me about what it's going to look like as he ages and he changes teams, etc. So I'm not very high on him. I'm of these three, I'm most high on Tank Dell because I think Tank Dell is unique in his skill set from those other two, and that he provides a lot of slot PPR value and showed excellent rapport with Stroud when they were both healthy together. So I like Collins, but I think of all these three, I would go with Dell, and Dell is also going the latest in his ADP relative to these other ones. So I would prefer Tank Dell among these three receivers. Then I would go Nico Collins and then Stephon Diggs. Other guys of note, John Mechie is an interesting flyer who's not getting drafted. He was a highly drafted receiver out of Alabama. He's somebody that I would be monitoring. Noah Brown had some breakout games last season, so he's very capable as well, but I think I would stash him maybe only in deep leagues. I wouldn't consider drafting him right now either. Robert Woods doesn't really give me that upside either that I'm be looking for. Tight end, Dalton Schultz is a pretty solid value at tight end based on where he's going. He doesn't really give you the elite upside necessarily as some of these other guys that are going higher, like Kincaid, for example, just talked about the Buffalo Bills. But Schultz did have some breakout games last season, and if these guys have injuries, Schultz shows that he's capable of doing well. So I wouldn't hate if among the late round tight ends, I think he's one of the better options that you can consider in that position. Defense. So making moves on defense. Do we want to draft them though? I don't really know right now. I would probably still have them in the streaming tier, but Will Anderson, adding Danielle Hunter, like guys like that. I think that there's a lot of potential on this team that it can continue to rise and could be a week-to-week streamer, maybe even one that you hold throughout the season. Right now, I'm not necessarily doing that. Kayemi Fairbairn, he's a kicker I'd be interested in if he is on waivers. We will now move to the Indianapolis Colts. And one of my favorite quarterbacks that is really not a secret anymore, but is somebody that I really like and a lot of other fantasy fans really like as well, as Anthony Richardson. The biggest question mark is, can he stay healthy? But this guy showed when he did play, he could put up some numbers. And he has elite rushing value. And because of his health concerns, he's going very late. So this is definitely a lottery ticket. He's generally going into the 5th and 6th round. Some people are even taking him higher than that in the 4th round even. So it's a huge risk. But if he could tap into that value, and he's got a great offensive scheme with Shane Steichen, I could really see a breakout season. So I would be trying to target him if you get into that window. So looking at him or CJ Stroud, for example, I would rather have Richardson than Stroud. Just take the chance on the rushing if you are going to take a quarterback that high. There's some other quarterbacks that I like later, though, but Richardson is one that I do really like if you want to go the rushing route, but you don't want to spend the capital on Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, etc. Joe Flacco, shout out to him for staying in the league. Jonathan Taylor is the running back, and Jonathan Taylor has really soured a lot of people's opinions of him based on what happened 2 years ago. But I think that when healthy, he is a very solid running back, and I think that if you're getting him in that early 2nd round turn, this is a pretty good value for him. Remember, now that Zach Moss is not there, there's going to be a lot more opportunity for Taylor, and if you look at the guys after him on the depth chart here, there's really not that much behind him. So I could definitely see a system where Jonathan Taylor is going to have a very good season and surprise a lot of people again. He's very talented, just kind of had a really rough 2022, and that's kind of dropped him in his ADP. But very solid value if you're looking for a running back. I'm definitely interested in him. Wide receivers. Michael Pittman Jr. is the number 1 on this team. They don't really have somebody that can really step up after that that's shown a lot of consistency. You kind of got that a little bit with Josh Downs at times last season, but Adonai Mitchell is somebody that I am really interested in among this wide receiver core. He's going generally around the 9th to 10th round. Maybe some places take him in the 8th round, but blazing fast speed. He ran a 4.34, I believe, 4.34 or 4.33. But he's a fast receiver that can get downfield. It was an excellent player out of Texas. I can really see him step into that void that they need as that second wide receiver. And you're getting him at very solid value late. It's worth taking a flyer on. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Pittman is my favorite among these receivers if I have to stack them up, though, because that Pittman-Richardson combination was really clicking last season when they were both healthy. So I think that Pittman, if you're going to get Richardson, I would definitely be trying to get Pittman too, get that stack. There's a lot of upside potential I see there. Not too much to say about these other wide receivers here. Let's move to the tight end. And again, not much to say about the tight end position on this team because they really don't have any tight end that stands out. And a trend that we saw from last season and really a lot of the seasons prior with Indianapolis is that they don't really have any one tight end that stands out. They use multiple tight ends and they spread the ball around quite a lot. So Jelani Woods is the number one here, but I don't think that he is going to be fantasy relevant. And then, some weeks you'll get Jelani Woods, then you'll get Granson, and then you'll get Mo Alley Cox and some 1-yard red zone touchdown pass from a offensive lineman or something like that. But there's just way too much unpredictability. Just don't mess around with this tight end core. Defense has some talented players on this team. And, I think that it sets them up in a situation where they could be a successful streaming defense as well. I personally wouldn't be trying to take them in a draft, but I would be keeping an eye on this defense as a streaming option. Their kicker is Matt Gay, who he's been a successful kicker in the league for quite a while. This is a good streaming option, especially since they play in a dome late in seasons. I haven't talked about that yet, but kickers in domes, especially in November, December when it gets cold, are very valuable because you don't have to worry about the elements of weather. Next, we have the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Trevor Lawrence got an extension this offseason. Not really sure if that was the right decision for them. But he is a guy that is coming off a pretty rough season and now going pretty late in drafts. And I still don't know if it's worth taking him late in the draft because generally what we've seen from him is that he does not have a very high ceiling. I have to go back and look at his stats, but the number of times that he ranked in the top 10 throughout his career among fantasy quarterbacks is extremely small. Typically on a week-to-week basis, you're getting about 15 to 20 points from him. There's other quarterbacks that you can get later that, like CJ Stroud last season, for example. Trevor Lawrence was getting drafted in the 5th and 6th round. Then you have CJ Stroud come in undrafted and just obliterated anything that Trevor Lawrence did last season. And I really think that he's now in a situation where you have to prove it to me for me to take a chance on him. Maybe I'm open to my opinion changing, but I am not very interested in Trevor Lawrence in fantasy football this season. Travis Etienne I am very interested in, though, and that's because he is still very underrated. He's going in the mid to late 2nd round. For example, the guys that I've talked about in the last 2 videos, Devon Achane and Derrick Henry, those are guys that are getting drafted around that same range as Travis Etienne. And I think that Etienne would be a way better value than both of those two. He's among the top 5 running backs consistently throughout fantasy football last season, has rapport with Trevor Lawrence going back to their college days. I think this is a pretty safe running back that you could take on for this season, and you would get you'd be pretty satisfied with the results that you're getting from him. Also gives you a lot of passing floor too, with screen passes and stuff like that. So I really like ETN and the value that he's going. He could be excellent in fantasy football this season. Tank Bigsby is a handcuff. I think a lot of people bought into his hype last season, didn't really necessarily work out. I would take him on only if you're going to have ETN as your number one running back. Get the handcuff there. The wide receiver core is more interesting on this team because there's a lot of question marks about what this will look like. Generally, last season, they alternated between Christian Kirk, was successful at times, and a hodgepodge of other players that came in and were successful at times. Sometimes it was Evan Ingram. A lot of that came back down to Trevor Lawrence, though. So how is Trevor Lawrence going to do? Is he going to set these guys up to be successful? And I think that getting Brian Thomas is a great start. This is a guy who is very successful in college, very fast 40 runner, one of the elite wide receiver prospects from this draft. And they're getting him, and he has a huge opportunity to step into this team and fill a void that this team needs. They don't have an elite one, and you're getting this guy generally in the 8th to 10th round, kind of that same range as Mitchell. And Brian Thomas, I think, is going to be somebody that I am definitely targeting among those late wide receivers. I'm not going to probably put him in a position to be my starter. I'm going to have some wide receivers before him, but there's a lot of boom value potential here because they really need someone to step up as their number one wide receiver. Christian Kirk is a solid option. He had some good games last season, but I think that he doesn't really represent the upside that I'd like to see relative to other wide receivers going in that range. And then Gabe Davis, I'm just avoiding like COVID. This guy is way too inconsistent. Do not buy into any of his numbers because he's just going to follow up with a 0 the next week. And that's pretty much all I have for the wide receivers on this team. A lot of open spots for other guys. We'll see what happens in training camp. Tight end, Evan Ingram is a solid value too. He has good rapport with Trevor Lawrence, gets a lot of receptions. That's a good tight end to target in those late rounds if you're not going to invest in one early. I think he represents good value for you in that position that you can take on and have pretty solid results. Defense. So this team has some solid defensive players like Eric Armstead. They have Josh Allen, guys like that. I'm not interested in drafting this team, but I am looking at this defense as a potential stream option. And I think they're a team you can get late, but I'm not tied to this defense as my long-term solution. And then I don't really have anything to say about these kickers on this team. Cam Little and Riley Patterson are competing. All right. We'll close out with the Tennessee Titans. Tennessee has got a lot of question marks for this season. Will Levis, starting quarterback. What is that going to look like? His ADP is actually lower than JJ McCarthy right now, which is crazy because JJ McCarthy's not going to be the starter. But Will Levis, if you're getting him undrafted or late in 2 QB formats, I think this could be a good flyer. He's definitely got the toughness needed to be an NFL quarterback. Is he somebody that is going to have the skill and accuracy, though? He's going to be on kind of a short lease. If he doesn't prove it this year, he's probably done. But I think that there's a lot of potential here. He's getting his coach is coming from Cincinnati, which made Joe Burrow very successful. And if he can implement a similar offense and put Will Levis into a position to be successful, I think this could be some solid value. Not sure I would draft him, but I'm keeping my eye on him for sure. 2 QB leagues, I would definitely consider taking a flyer on him. In terms of the running backs, so Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears are both going around the same range, ADP. Tony Pollard coming from Dallas last season, disappointing season in 2023. I am higher on Tyjae Spears, and if you could pick him up in the range that he's going, which is generally around like 9th, 10th, 11th round, that's excellent value for somebody that was taking snaps away from Derrick Henry and is just going to continue to improve on that and now has even more opportunity. I think Pollard is best as a change of pace back. I think as we saw last season, he doesn't really do well with the heavy workload. So this sets up perfectly for Spears to take on more responsibility on this team. And I think that he is a guy that has a lot of potential. And at the range that you're getting him, you could be getting a consistent week-to-week running back that you're starting every single week without question. Definitely would be all over picking him up on this team. He's my favorite player among the Titans. Wide receivers. So, again, they're getting that offensive scheme from Brian Callahan when he was in Cincinnati. So, there's a lot of potential here for Calvin Ridley. I just don't like Calvin Ridley as a fantasy football player. He always comes with a lot of expectations and generally does not live up to it. And he's been through a lot of adversity throughout his career that, for whatever reason has not really worked out for him. But I just am skeptical to think that all of a sudden he's going to have a breakout season on this team. He is the number one, but it's just, there's just so many question marks. If he is going at a range that I think it's a solid flyer going in that 8th to 10th round, like some of these other receivers I've talked about. But if you're taking Calvin Ridley or you're taking Mitchell or Brian Thomas, I would definitely take Mitchell or Brian Thomas over Ridley. The next one is Hopkins. Hopkins is I loved Hopkins when he was on the Texans. He was one of the receivers I always targeted every single season. Kind of getting in the back half of his career now, and I'm not really interested in him this season. But I do think that he's going to have a consistent volume and will be relevant throughout the season. Tyler Boyd is also coming over as well, and don't underestimate his ability to be a contributor in this offense too, because he does have familiarity from his time in Cincinnati. You got other guys as well, like Nick Westbrook-Akine, who had some okay games under the previous regime, but it's not really in a great position to contribute a lot this year. Chig Okongwu was somebody who was really hyped up last season and generally disappointed. I'm not really interested in trying that out right now. Maybe he'll turn it around. Guys like CJ Uzama, Hayden Hurst were moderately successful under Brian Callahan. So we'll see what happens, but he's not somebody I'm really interested in. This defense is probably going to be among the worst in football, so don't consider that. And Nick Folk, this guy's got to be like 40 plus now. But I don't consider him unless this offense shows that it can set him up to kick field goals, is personally how I see this going. All right, so that's all I've got for the AFC South. As I said earlier, please check out my channel if you want to see more fantasy football content as well as other content as well. And we'll see you guys next time. Have a good night.